Thank you so much for having me here, Joseph. And I'm delighted to be here talking to students and faculty. Our experience, I think, was colored by the year that we, not the year, but the decade that we came to Ireland. There were very few people. We were, in the first influx of non-white people that were arriving into Ireland, and definitely our experience was colored by the color of our skin, because the brown experience in Ireland is very, very different from the black experience in Ireland. And we were discussing this earlier. And it's quite a, it's based on, preconceived notions that Irish people have, that if you are brown, you are most likely then to be a doctor, because that's just the way the visa rules worked in Ireland in the 80s and even to this day. So if, in the 80s, you only got a visa from India if you were a doctor. End of story. You could not apply for any other kind of job. And so, that definitely colored the way we were looked at when we arrived. It was a welcoming place. We never felt there was no overt racism. There was no sort of, undercurrents either. We were only 5 Asian families in Sligo, in the whole of Sligo, and every one of us were doctor families. Yeah. We had a guard, a policeman assigned to us, and he was the policeman for aliens, because that's what we were known as. We were the aliens, And it was a completely different situation, because he would come once in 6 months, collect all our passports, and he would take the train up to Dublin to have them stamped. It's unheard of if you now. Yeah. And I think I know that you've had talk here in Villanova, and I think the black experience has been completely different. A lot of black people, are immediately classed as either asylum seekers, refugees, so the whole attitude towards black people is different in Ireland. And I mean, it's changing now, because I think, peculiarly enough, it's sport and sporting activities that have made people change their attitudes towards black people. Because, black athletes have absolutely been just the star of the last Olympics, of several, international athletic events. And that's actually made a huge difference, I think. Yeah. To the way people are suddenly realizing, oh my God.
They're on the team.
No, not only that. When you have a black athlete being interviewed, and he or she is talking with a completely Dublin accent or a completely Cork accent, and then people wake up and say, my God, this person obviously grew up here, is born here, went to school here. Yeah. And so many black people now actually they are more likely to talk Irish. To talk Irish, know it really well, So I think there's a whole kind of realization that, the generation of black people that you see are not recent arrivals. They're not asylum seekers. They're not refugees. They're actually people who are born here. They've been here for 20 years or how many, 15, 20 years, and they've grown up here. And there's it's wonderful, is what I'd say. It's wonderful,
So in telling stories about, particularly, say, in Paddy Indian, but in others, is there a set story about people coming to Ireland? Do you know? Or is it, here we have the streets were paved with gold, people came to make it. Is there a sense in Ireland of the immigrant story?
Well, I think the immigrant story in Ireland has been kind of fairly straight. It's fairly straightforward, stock standard. People coming to study, people coming to work. Now, at the moment, people, our health service would collapse. 70% of the Irish health service is staffed by non-Irish people, non-white people, you know. So, I mean, there is a recognition that without, without brown and black people, people of color, that...
So Ireland is known, I mean, it's historically known as the land of welcome.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you say that that was your experience? Is that an experience?
Oh God, yeah. And I think even today, in the main, it is a land of welcomes. And I think, when you see it, when you look at social media, you'd get the impression that, my God, there's such a racist bunch of people in Ireland, and that's actually so not true.
Well, they're here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in Ireland, the perfect answer to all the racist people in Ireland, of which there are very few really, but they're clickbait. That's why they feature in the newspapers and the TV stations and radio stations, because who wants to know good news?
Yeah.
It's only the bad news that makes news. Yeah. But the best answer was the recent elections. I mean, all of them lost their deposits. They didn't make enough votes. So, there is no better answer than the entire electorate getting together and saying, "Feck you,"
right.
Do you know?
Yep.
That's
great.
And
it's good to hear.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse the language.
So, can we talk for a minute about The Tainted?
Yes, sure, absolutely.
The premise I find very compelling, but also the setup that we talked about of who the Tainted were. Yeah. And so this is so many people may or may not know that the British Empire, also in India, also both in Ireland and in India, many people saw a commonality and common cause, right? Many did not. Many of the soldiers, something that you would say 70% of the soldiers in the British military were from Ireland, right? They said that the English owned it, the Scottish ran it, and the Irish fought for it.
So true.
Right? And so this is a novel in which we have several tainted identities. Yeah. Maybe if we can say something about that.
So The Tainted is loosely based on the mutiny of a regiment called the Connaught Rangers. And the Connaught Rangers were a really, really famous Irish regiment. They had history of valor, honor. They went way back. They were 300-year history. They were in the U.S. fighting for the Brits in the U.S. War of Independence. So I mean, they were in Mexico. They were in South Africa. They were everywhere. And they were several times posted to India. And one of the times in 1920, when they were stationed in India, there was a lot of the Irish soldiers got letters from home and news from home about this group of people, the Black and Tans, who were causing mayhem.
Yeah, these were British irregular soldiers who were sort of not the ones who went to fight in World War I or in other places, and they wore out uniforms that some were from the Boer War, some were from the Desert War, so they were black and tan outfits.
Yeah, and they were just...
And they were very brutal and not properly trained.
Yeah.
Militia, yeah.
Ragtag, very brutal. So, because of what the Black and Tans were doing to the Irish population, to the Irish Catholic population, the soldiers in India mutinied. And, that mutiny was quelled very brutally because, as you said, 70% of 70% of the British Army in India was Irish. So they were afraid that if the mutiny spread to other regiments, they would lose their empire sooner than they did it eventually. But so the book actually talks about these three groups of people. One is the Irish Catholic soldiers, and they were always only soldiers. They were never officers. They were very, very few Catholic officers. None.
They opened. Yeah. They were English Catholic officers.
Yeah, but not the Irish were mainly soldiers. Yeah, and because they had served the crown, they were tainted and they were ostracized when they came back to Ireland. So that's one group. Then the other group were the officers who were mainly Anglo-Irish, and the Anglo-Irish were people, who the general Irish population would have considered the oppressors. And yet, they were never fully accepted by the English. They were not English enough. They were never accepted by the Irish for not being Irish enough. So they were also a community in limbo, and I'd say right up to the late 80s, they were still a community in limbo, not quite knowing where they fitted. And then the third group of people were actually, probably the most oppressed, who had the saddest outcome in life, and that they were the Anglo-Indians. And Anglo-Indians were, they were mixed race, children of, mixed race liaisons that were not legitimized, So, and they were tainted as well. The Indians never thought them Indian enough. In fact, they were tainted, absolutely tainted in Indian eyes. And their white fathers, people, whether they were Irish, Scot, Welsh, or English, did not consider them, part of their thing. So they were kind of a mixed race, literally left in limbo.
And you could see them. I mean, in some E.M. Forster novels or other, they're on the outside of trying to get into the Raj and British culture, and never being accepted.
Yeah,
but and then they're also in Tagore and Rabindranath Tagore and
Kim.
Kim in Rudyard Kipling's novel is the one who can slip between both sides. He's a master of disguises. He can be European. He can be Tibetan. He can be Indian.
Yeah.
He can be. So.
And in fact, it's amazing how Anglo-Indians hid their ethnicity, because there's many very famous people who hid it. So one of them is Cliff Richards.
Yeah.
Engelbert Humperdinck.
Yeah.
Merle Oberon, the famous actress, Hollywood actress.
Who is it?
Merle Oberon. She would have been in the 40s, big name in the 40s, And then Marlon Brando actually married an Anglo-Indian woman who, when he found out she was Anglo-Indian, actually divorced her. Yeah. And that's a little-known story,
Scandalous.
Yeah. So, I mean, Anglo-Indian people were really, really ostracized.
No, I know. Yeah.
And they found it very hard. But now, there's been a sea change.
Yeah. People are proud of it.
Yeah. Now people are very proud of their heritage, and in India, Anglo-Indian people are, they're there at the top of their game.
Yeah.
Anusha, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. You mentioned Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about the title character.
Yeah.
Marlowe.
Marlowe. Yeah.
In which, so maybe we can switch to talk about the inheritance a bit. Because the inheritance is set in a place that I hold very dear in my heart, in West Cork, where I've spent many years and have relations. And here there's an insider-outsider who comes into this world, and his name is Marlowe.
Yeah.
Do you want to read the opening of it?
I'd love to read the opening.
I don't want to give anything away, because the opening does it better than...
Okay. Yeah. Will I just stand up here?
Yeah.
Read? Okay. So this is just the opening first page. Oh, get to it. Glengariff, Ireland, April 1986. It all began the day he found out that his sister was his mother. As the minibus hiccuped its way up the steep, rutted road, Marlowe repeated that to himself. This journey started when I found out that Mary was my mam, and mam was my nana. The revelation had made his head spin for a good few days. In fact, his whole life was still spinning out of control nearly. Maybe things would be better now that he was finally in Ireland. At least that's what everybody had said repeatedly. It had taken him several weeks before he had agreed that heading to the Beara Peninsula, to the old cottage in Glengariff, might be a move in the right direction. Mary had said it was a chance to start afresh. Don't feckin' call me that, Mary. You'll never be my mam. She had teared up. Ah, Christ, don't be like that, Marlowe. It is what it is now, for God's sake. He looked at his sister and his mother facing him across the table in their new avatars as his mother and grandmother. You keep telling me that nobody in Glengariff knows, but are you sure? They both nodded. No one, not in Ireland, not even here in London. Mam reached out and took his hand in hers, squeezing it hard as Mary continued. Any other way and we'd have lost you. I'd have lost you, Malo. Mam wiped her eyes. Yes, Mary would have lost you. Do you even understand? 4 months later at the airport, Mary had pressed a medallion into his palm and hugged him. Write every week and ring us when you can. Mam said there used to be a phone box by the Garda station in the village. Ring me at the surgery. I know Dr. Khan won't mind. I'll ring Mam when I can, he replied. Mrs. Kelly won't mind giving her a shout across the landing. Okay, but call me too. Now, as he peered into the darkness outside the bus, he ran his finger around the smooth oval edge of the holy medal in his coat pocket. St. Jude? What the feck, Mary? I'm not a fecking lost cause.
So there's, thank you for reading that. There's something here about secrets. I mean, I don't think the people I'm talking about have all passed away, but my cousin, it would be my mother's cousin, we had a sister who went away went away to London and she never came back. And everybody, I mean, that was most likely she got pregnant. And my cousin, my generation, someone was adopted. And we don't know, I mean, the circumstances of how that adoption came about and when marriage happened afterwards. There were a lot of secrets, is what I'm trying to say, in the Beara Peninsula. And a lot of it had to do with pre-divorce, pre-contraception, pre-abortion, all sorts of things that are now in Ireland. So was that motivating some of the setup of this? I mean, thinking about 1986 as a different time?
Yeah, I think, you know, and I've written about this, that, you know, the country of my birth and the country that I call home are both riddled with secrets, you know, and, you know, this whole notion of not making a show of yourself, not letting your family down. What will the neighbors say? What will your grandparents say? Well, actually, grandparents are okay, but what will your uncles and aunts say? You know, you're not as good as your cousins. You know, can't you be like your cousin, or don't be like your cousin? You know, some variation of the theme. So, and I think as a writer, it's just a gold mine when you come from a country of secrets. You know, you can actually just. There are so many stories to be told, and wherever there's secrets, there's shame, and wherever there's shame, there's a story. And I know that sounds very selfish, but I'm just saying it from a point of view of as a writer. I mean, obviously, you know, that's a terrible thing. I mean, both the countries have these terrible legacies of shame and secrets, and you know. So
and particularly against women.
Yeah, particularly against women. And I mean, I didn't set out to write The Inheritance about, you know, I didn't set out saying, oh, I'm going to, you know, talk about secrets. But just the way it panned out, you know, so many of my characters have secrets.
And you know, I mean, the novel we see in the picture here, and we'll transition to talking about the West in a little bit. But the woods in which some of the dramatic scenes take place. It's not a secret, but it's a story that hasn't been told very much of the O'Sullivan Beara. And something that happened 400 years ago, thereabouts. Could you give us a little bit of tell us
it's quite an incredible story, because O'Sullivan Beara was, you know, he was one of the last chiefs, one of the last clan chiefs to hold out against the English.
Against the Elizabethan forces.
Against Elizabethan forces. And the Irish were defeated, you know, soundly defeated at the Battle of Kinsale. And shortly after that, in 1602, O'Sullivan Beara found himself hiding, you know, he had retreated to Glengariff Forest, which was an absolutely impenetrable, thick thick oak forest, and he remained hidden there for over 6 months, and you can imagine how dense the forest was, that a huge number of people, 2,000-3,000 people, could have just hidden themselves away. And but as it happened, the English found out where the cattle was hidden, and their entire survival depended on having the cows and having the sheep, for food and milk and cheese. And the day the evening they realized that the English had actually killed all, like 3,000 cows, 2,000 sheep were slaughtered in one field, and because that field ran with blood, it's still to this day that townland is called Derrinafulla, oak field of the blood, oak field of blood. And so within a few hours, O'Sullivan Barrett decided to up sticks and head to the north of Ireland, to Leitrim, where he knew that there was another clan, the O'Rourke's, and that he would get shelter from them. So he, about between 1,300 and 1,500 of them, literally just walked out of the forest, like within a few hours' notice, of having made the decision. And left behind were, the elderly, some wounded, children. So there was a good few left behind. And he made this march on the 31st of December, 1602, New Year's Day. It was one of the most bitterly cold winters in living memory at that time. And when they arrived in Leitrim, it's nearly a 400-kilometer walk.
Yeah.
Took 16 days to walk. So they must have practically ran.
And they were attacked?
And they were attacked all the way. And when they arrived, there was only 35 of them had survived, from 1,500 or so to 35. And the reason the story is not really well known outside of Beara is because of the shame. And what was the shame? The shame was that right the way up to Leitrim, he was attacked by Irish. It was Irish on Irish, because Irish clans and Irish towns and Irish villages had been told by the English, had been threatened. If you give him help, you're going to lose everything. Your cattle will be gone, your fields will be burnt, you'll be turned out of your homes. But they were also told it's not enough that you don't help them. You have to actively stop them. So, Irish people all along the way, Irish clans turned on O'Sullivan Barrett, and that is a huge matter of shame. Now, this is my own making, my own theory, that is one of the reasons why that story was never told. Because, every other story of valor and, victory and battle and
glorious defeat, as well as
has been told by bards, and the memory has been kept alive. But this one memory was never, the only reason this story has come back and is alive again is because of historians and academics, and to this day, actually, within the peninsula, there are people who carry grudges from 400 years ago.
Oh, sure.
Because it was a lot of O'Sullivan Barrett's cousins betrayed him. So,
And so one of the characters in the book has an echo character from 400 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you want to read a passage from that section?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Is there something that's...
There is actually, yeah. Just give me a minute, sorry.
So the Beara Peninsula sticks out into the Atlantic. It's one of the fingers of Kerry, right? It's like the second finger. So it's Dingle and then down, and West Cork, I should say. Kerry and Cork, because they're sort of leading to one another.
So the story from the past is actually, I've told the story from the past through the eyes of a 7-year-old boy who is actually non-verbal. And this is his, just a very brief account of him, of when they find out that, that they've lost all their cattle. On the last day of that year, my Lord O'Sullivan sat in council with O'Connor Kerry, Owen Burke, Turlock O'Driscoll, and the Gallowglass around a small fire after darkness had fallen, planning their course of defensive action for the next day. But God had other plans, and it was in one fell swoop that my Lord O'Sullivan's decisions were made for him. I was curled up under the hounds with my feet to the fire when I heard my father's distinct bird call, a cuckoo in winter to alert the sentries as he approached the camp. A few minutes later, he rushed into the clearing, panting and bloodied, and all the warriors jumped to their feet, their hands to their weapons. He was almost unrecognizable, but for the horn slung across his shoulder, its silver tip glistening through the red cloak of blood that dripped off him. His eyes were wide-looking, and he buckled to his knees. "My lord, we have lost the animals, every single head. We have lost the creac, slaughtered along with those who guarded them." "What are you talking, man? McSweeney, to your feet, brother. Here, drink this." A cup was thrust into my father's mouth, and he drank, half choking, before he turned to look at the 4 other bonnets who had stumbled into the clearing behind him, all wounded and just as bloodied as my father. My Lord O'Sullivan roared, "For God's sake, Goran, what has come to pass, man? Spit it out." I left the hounds and crawled to my father's side, but he didn't even so much as lower his glance at me, yet held me close as he described the fierce battle that had been fought and lost. A few stragglers who followed my father into camp, grown men and fine warriors all, stood weeping inconsolably as they listened. "It's a field of blood, my lord, just a field of blood. They crept up, must have come through the valley in Cumbercorn, descended upon us and took us by surprise." My father choked as he described the carnage that followed. "Every head of cattle, every sheep slaughtered, my lord, the ponies too. The bonnets, we fought to the very end. They died drowned in an oak field of blood, my lord." My Lord O'Sullivan was quick with his instructions. "Attend to these men, friar. We will need every soul for what this night might bring." He then turned to some of the kern, standing stunned beside him, all shaken to their core. "Make haste, lads, and send word to all our people in the other camps. Ask them to gather here without a moment to waste. Our lives will depend on the next few hours." The urgency was palpable as he signalled his Uncle Dermot of Dursey and other trusted commanders to walk with him a short distance away, to a large overhanging rock out of earshot. As for the rest of us, we stood open-mouthed, a terrible hush descending over us on hearing of our great, irretrievable loss. Everyone knew immediately that a fearsome fate was to befall us, for to lose the cattle was to lose all means of survival, to lose all hope, and that devastating news was relayed from camp to camp. In that moment, however, all I could think of was how my mother tended to my wounds when cruel stones cut into my skin. I left my father's lap and, fashioning a pouch out of my ragged cloak, began gathering all the moss that I could find, pulling it away from the boulders and bark till my belly bulged like a woman with child. I squatted beside my father and began to wipe the blood from his face with a handful of soft moss. He closed his eyes and allowed me to sponge off the sticky gore till I had worked my way across his arms and legs, by which time his breathing had slowed and he stopped trembling. He reached out to hold my shoulder. "My son, we must make ourselves ready, for I feel the time has come when our purpose will be revealed, the reason why we were saved, why God spared us in Dursey."
I know that many people in the room have been reading The Dead, with James Joyce.
Yeah.
And the sense of battles fought, battles lost, the past hanging very heavy onto the present and changing. Have people finished reading it? Or are you starting reading it? The Dead? It should have finished. Hands up, I don't want to give it away, but hands up if you finished it. So, okay. So, hands up if you haven't finished it. All right, so their hands up.
As long as my professor doesn't see me, my hand is up.
So, you still have time. It's an amazing short story. And once you get to the end, you'll get a sense of what we're talking about. But it's set in Dublin, right? And then in the West, begins to feature at the very end of the story and come back. What does the West mean? What does the West mean? And here we have, this is where the last holdouts of the Gaelic order were. As Elizabethans, they would come in, they would conquer, then they would set up an English assize court and a new legal system. What does the West mean to you and to your characters?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different country.
So the West of Ireland as opposed to the East of Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a different country, the West, and especially the Southwest. And, the Beara Peninsula is literally the most southwesterly point in Europe. Yeah. Excuse me. And I think, the Irishness is distilled into a very kind of, very pure, pure would not be the right word. Distilled into intensity.
Yeah.
It's an intense distillation of Irishness. So, if you're talking about shame, secrets, all of that is sort of more intense. Suffering. It's all and it's all very intense. And yet, along with that, there's this intense, intense pride in your neighborhood, in being helpful. That whole thing of you need to know the mettle of your neighbor, whether he's going to be good in the daytime and will he be good at night after he's had a drink, all of that. So I mean, for me, the West is pure Ireland, untainted by even now. I'm actually talking about the present. The West is pure Ireland. And you kind of, I know we're talking about the West, but actually you hit the West nearly as you're coming out of Dublin. Because Dublin is just such a beyond the pale, and it's also cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah.
The minute you leave Dublin, you can, and then there are pockets in Dublin, like if you go to, for example, if you go to Copperface Jazz, this really, it's a really famous nightclub where all the country folk who are working and living and studying in Dublin congregate, and you can actually feel the difference.
Yeah. And so, just to talk about shame, so we have a very cultured person, as Gabriel Conroy, in The Dead, who sort of opens up this story, and is trying to be kind of is the master of eloquence and whatnot. And then his wife Greta, is from the West and has a different sort of sense of meaning. Is there a shame? I mean, we see Gabriel Conroy sort of embarrassment.
Yeah, I mean, I think
of what that means to be from the West.
Yeah, I think it's not different in any other country, in that people from the country have a chip on their shoulder. People from the city have a chip on their shoulder. There are inferiority complexes built into superiority complexes. Like it's just it's such a mishmash of
the rural-urban divide.
The rural-urban divide is in a way, I suppose. I mean, even though it exists in every country, I think in Ireland it's very, very much very specific, because I think there's nothing that can get up the goat of somebody from rural Ireland to be called a cute whore, or when a politician from the rural areas, and we have a kind of a breed of them, and when they talk and then they're mocked or they're questioned, even if all of that kind of adds to that.
Yeah, and then you have politicians like Jackie Healy-Rae.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I didn't want to mention names. I'm exactly talking about, and they're playing to their constituents, my children were brought up in and around Dublin, because where we live in Kildare is just literally a suburb of Dublin. But my older girl is married a Kerry man. you know.
And you've spent many years on and off down in Barra.
Yeah, yeah. And so he comes from a farming family. You know, his parents are sheep farmers, and he's a vet. So like there couldn't be anything more. You know, he's really he's salt of the earth, Kerry. You know.
Yeah.
And I can see sometimes when she says to me, you know, she would say stuff like, he doesn't trust people. You know, like he wouldn't. And that's actually a very, very culty thing.
Yeah.
Do you know?
You're going to have to explain culty.
Okay, so culty is the word that we use in Ireland to describe somebody who is from a rural area, or basically from outside Dublin. and sometimes it can be said with a lot of love, and sometimes it's derogatory, and you know, sometimes it can be a throwaway thing that like an insult merely.
Yeah.
But you know, I see it even very much so even in modern, and that thing of, you know, not, you know, having that feeling that everybody is out to get you.
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone's a bit of a, if you grow up in the country and then you go to Philadelphia,
Yeah.
or you go to New York City, everybody's trying to take advantage.
Yeah. And I mean, that, you know, there are a few characteristics like that. I mean, some of them are exaggerated, obviously, but you know, I mean, the whole nature of rural Ireland, where communities are helpful, come together,
Yeah.
neighbours matter.
Yeah.
You know, there is a respect for, whether it's good or not, there's a respect for authority. You know, in most cases it's not a good thing, but because you know, authority is represented by the guards, by the priest, by the doctor.
Yeah.
You know, so that's not good, that they should be deference to them all the time.
Yeah.
But I think I have a line in the book where you know, one of the characters dies, and the whole community is waiting in the yard of the dead man, you know, in his house. And then when the doctor, the priest, and the guard arrive, somebody says, "It'll all be sorted now." You know,
Right. Yeah.
and then somebody else says, "Well, he's hardly going to come to life. You know,
Right.
what's wrong with you?" You know.
Right.
So I mean, it's that kind of thing. You know, the presence of the guard, the doctor, and of course nowadays maybe even the politician. You know.
There's I don't know if you ever came across the book The Burning of Bridget Cleary.
No.
So, a scholar from UCD, Angela Burke, wrote it.
Okay.
And it's about a woman who was in the 1890 thereabouts, 1892, was burned by her male relatives,
Ooh,
who
okay.
and they thought she was a changeling.
Okay.
She was very ill,
Mm.
and she'd become not herself.
Mm.
And they were trying to chase out the fairies by bringing fire and hot irons close to her.
Mm.
And then there was a fire, something the lamp spilled, and
Yeah.
it all went south. And in it, she describes how the absolute respect for authority and the
Yeah.
priest
Yeah.
was, as well as the police, was just what you're describing.
Mm.
And at the same time, there was this undercurrent of lawlessness,
Yeah.
of outlaw
Yeah.
worship, you know, and respect for it. And there's a bit of that in the Inheritance.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
is that outlawing side?
I think it's I think that's the what's it called, you know, the complication of the Irish character.
Yeah.
You know, that on the one hand you would, and it kind of like literally like the tainted, you know, on the one hand you were colonized, and then on the other hand you're happy to help somebody else be colonized.
Right, and,
Yeah,
and
so-
it's the story of Irish America too. So many Irish came over here
Yeah,
and eventually got into the police force.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think definitely in rural Ireland that there is this thing of, oh, I'll take a chance.
Yeah.
You know, I'll take a chance. I will sort of, you know, I'm looking for the word. You know, I'll get one better.
Yeah.
You know, I'll take a chance and get one better.
Yeah.
You know, nobody will know. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's definitely there. You know, and also this thing of, you know, if I get caught, I'll see what happens. You know.
You're talking about
Yeah, you're talking about it. Yeah.
But I'm mindful of a couple of things made at the time. Do people have questions? Do people have comments What would you like to, what's on your minds? How are you taking this in? Thoughts, shyness? Gigi, Dr. Coleman?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cavert, for this fascinating conversation. I haven't read the book yet, but I'm just thinking about what you've been saying. A couple of times you use the expression "to this day,"
Yeah.
which can be biblical too. You know, you read the Old Testament nowadays, yeah, and this has always happened to this day.
Yeah.
You know, but I was thinking about it very much in terms of history.
Yeah.
And by the passage you read, you know, both of them are almost, I think they refer to history. And so I'm thinking, how do you think about history, both as the material for fiction and history as kind of sacrosanct, you know, something that we need to know, and something that we should have some established parameters. So how do you, as a writer, how do you think about history in relation to your work? In terms of
Yeah, so I that's a fantastic question, because I'm so committed to reading, writing, and supporting good historical fiction. You know, that's been well researched, and you know that's.
And The Tainted is incredibly researched.
Yeah.
Let me just put that out there.
Thank you. Because I do think you know that historical fiction can actually inform sometimes. And I should not use the word in a better way, but in an easier way, can inform people, you know, without lecturing them about their past. And I think for me, like I did not know much about our own Indian history, because the history that I was taught when I was in school, the curriculum was still the old British curriculum, where, you know, everything that they did was for our benefit. You know? And it is only when I read, the first book I read that made me change my mind about that was reading Amitav Ghosh. You know, and when I read, you know, his book, I thought, oh my God, like, what were we taught and what was the reality? You know, and I think that applies applies in the US, it applies in the UK. You know, I mean, UK, the students in the UK don't know what the empire did to the rest of the world. You know, yeah. For example, they don't know that the entire Palestinian-Israeli conflict was caused by Britain.
We set up the partition.
They partitioned it. You know, so you know, like, unless you know your history, you know, how are you going to have any empathy, anger, sympathy, whatever, you know, whichever emotion you want to pick.
Northern Ireland, India and Pakistan,
Yeah.
Palestine and Israel,
Yeah.
all legacies,
Yeah.
I mean, parts of Africa about.
Yeah, I mean,
You know.
to think that, you know, that Africa was divided in straight lines, a continent of tribes, you know, so, and all of that is because of colonial empires, you know, that came in. So if people haven't been taught, you know, I think then good historical fiction will inform. You know, like there's a fantastic book, if you guys haven't read it, I would really highly recommend it. It's called You Will Be Safe Here, and it's by Damien Barr. He's a Scottish writer. It's a book of fiction, so beautifully researched, and it's about how the Brits established the very first concentration camps during the Boer War. Yeah, and it is an amazing story, because it's a two parallel stories, you know, set in the present and in the past. And like, for me, I thought, oh, I didn't know that history, but I learned it from this book.
And just
you
the
know.
Boer War was Britain's Vietnam in some ways. It's what began to change the sentiment about the imperial project. People began to say, what's going on there? Whose side are we supposed to be on? You know,
Yeah, so to answer your question, you know, I think, and of course it's very subjective what one person would call good historical fiction, because obviously it can be written from any angle, you know. But I think, I am very much a supporter of good historical fiction, well researched.
Let's take it. You guys, another question.
Yeah.
I'm completely fascinated by sort of the disparate groups of people that have been forced together by the British Empire. And specifically just how they relate to one another. So just as someone from India moving to Ireland, I can't, and I don't want to underestimate people, but I can't imagine a great many people that you first encountered knew anything about the situation that you were coming from. But was that something where there was sort of a shared kind of almost historical rhetoric or memory that you had with people?
Absolutely. I'll just tell you briefly an incident that happened to my husband. You know, he was actually traveling from Belfast to Sligo on a bus quite late at night, and after a couple of stops, he was the only passenger on the bus, and the bus driver told him, "Come up, Sonny, and sit in front here with me." You know, so my husband walked up and sat right in front, and the first thing the bus driver said to him was, "You and me have so much in common." He was like, "What?" You know? And he said, "Our shared hatred of the Brits." You know, and like my husband was really taken aback, you know, for something like that to suddenly just pop up. But I mean, nowadays it's not a hatred. It's not. It genuinely is not. You know, I mean, unless you're rabid, you know, from either side of the divide. But now there's an understanding, I think, you know, of what happened, and I think the more the British acknowledge what they did, the better the understanding. And as far as coming from India, you know, I learned so much about India and Indian history and what the Brits did to us after I came to Ireland. You know,
it's fascinating. I mean, I've thought a lot about this over my career. I sometimes use as a shorthand I ask people to imagine the American flag. Okay, what colors do you have? Imagine the British flag. What colors do you have? Imagine the flag of France. What colors do you have? You have primary colors. Now imagine the flag of Ireland. What colors are they? Imagine the colors of the Indian flag. Same colors. Imagine the flag of the Ivory Coast. Same colors. Primary colors are imperial. Secondary colors are post-colonial. Now, this is semiotics, right? And it's none of the people in India and Ireland did not set up their flags because they were not British, but they kind of did. I mean, it was Hinduism and Islam in India, and in Ireland, the Gaelic and the Orange Order, the Protestant Order, and coming together in unity with white. So it's fascinating though how these affinities are formed when people look up over the fence and say, "Oh, that happened to you too."
Yes. Yeah. But just to just finish off on what you were saying, just and as you were kind of as you just said, Joseph, you know, I think that whole notion of divide and rule, you know, is just such a clever continuing thing all over the world, even to this day. You know, whether you look at India, whether you look at Turkey, whether you look at Hungary, you know, you just name it. You know, wherever there are people, wherever there are governments that.
It was Voldemort's strategy in Harry Potter.
Divide and rule. You know, it's such a classic.
It's happening today.
Happening today. So, and you know, there's a professor in Jane Olmeyer, professor of history in Ireland, who is a professor of empire, and she has always said that you know, the British, all their experiments on how to colonize were done in Ireland, and then they took what they'd learned from Ireland and went to the rest of the world, because you know they had 800 years of it in Ireland before they left. And did it to the world.
In fairness, also things the ruling class in Britain often experimented on the population in Britain as well too. The land, the clearances of the Scottish Highlands were first land enclosures that were devastating in India, were devastating in Ireland, in which the commonage, the common pasturage, were shut, were closed, and it was divided up and fenced and given individual property owners who lived in London.
Yeah.
Right? Same on a global scale, that's what happened as lands were parceled up.
So true.
Yeah. So, last, and a student has any inkling of a tiny little shade of what might have been a question we were too shy to ask? Even if it's I'm confused about anything, you will feel so.
When you start writing your books, like what's your process? Where do you begin? Is it like an idea in your head? Do you focus on a plot line or your characters? Like, just curious to hear your.
Okay, so I have to admit my process is quite chaotic. So it's not, I mean, obviously I have a story in mind, but I never plot my books. I've never plotted my books, and I don't think I ever will. So that makes it quite daunting, you know, because then you're always nervous. Because if you're trusting your characters to draw your story, you have to really have you have to have a complete trust. And until you're kind of quite well into the book, you always have the doubt, you know, God, like, am I going down the right route? Or sometimes, you know, because you might actually change direction as you're writing because of what your character's, you know, telling you to do or taking you down whatever road. But I'm constantly having to kind of calm myself down and say, just trust the process, it'll happen, because it's happened 4 times before. But it is quite daunting. So I write by what is known as writing by headlights. Lots and lots of writers do it, you know. So it's the first 100 meters are lit if you're driving a car. You know, you don't know what's coming around the bend, but you know, it'll be lit when you get there, you know. So yeah, writing by headlights. So I'm not the only one. Many people do it, and I think depending on the genre, you know, I suppose if you're writing crime or you know you're writing a thriller, then you obviously will have to plot, you know. But I think if you're not in that genre, you can get away with the way I do it, and many people do it, not just me. You know.
Great question.
Are you going to write yourself, do you think?
Maybe down the line. I'm just curious, like when you're starting the process of writing a book, like it does seem like such a daunting task.
Yeah.
Where do you even begin? Like, but I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think for me, you know, once I have the names of my characters, I'm fine. Then they become real. So I have sometimes spent 6 months just contemplating on names, even before I start. Once I have the names, I know I'm on the right track.
Okay, can we give Cauvery a big round of applause?